It's not really common for Clash Royale to have unsolved mysteries, since there is so much information from the lore drops, animations, and to some extent Clashrama, and I'll be honest, I think most strange or weird lore inconsistencies were made purposely by Clash Royale to get people to talk about it, and therefore increase engagement with the game. It doesn't really make sense for Clash Royale to contradict years of lore and development for any other reason. However, there is a mystery about one of the most popular cards that to this day has not been addressed by Clash Royale, neither has it been solved. So in this video, I want to explore the strange unsolved mystery regarding the firecracker that, since it was released 5 years ago, has still not been solved. The mystery comes down to when the Clash Royale lead developer released a weird tweet at the end of 2019. The tweet read, "I'll hide a clue about Clash Royale's biggest character release of 2020 in the next character renders." This was a strange message, since it was the first time Clash Royale would be hiding character references in card renders, but who knows, they may have been hiding references in card renders for years without us knowing. Before this, any reference made to future characters would either be hidden in animations, or the team would acknowledge it, and this made sense. Why would the developers waste their time and resources to make a small reference to an upcoming card release in card renders, which, keep in mind, basically no one looks at? So this was really cool that Clash Royale would take the time to put a reference that basically no one was gonna notice. And the thing is, the tweet really did go unnoticed for the most part. It only received 99 likes, and I could only find 1 or 2 YouTube videos that covered the topic. And on Reddit, even though there were many posts about it, these posts got like 100 upvotes max, so I don't think there was that much attention on it. However, it would be very difficult to truly analyze this tweet without some backstory. For some context, at the end of 2019, it was clear that Clash Royale had big plans for card releases in 2020. This is because 2020 was projected to be the year they would release their 100th card. Being this ahead in the future, we now know that the cards released in 2020 in order was the Battle Healer, the Firecracker, the Heal Spirit, which was replacing the Heal spell, the Royal Delivery, the Skeleton Dragons, the Electro Spirit, the Electro Giant, which was the 100th card, and the Mother Witch at the end of 2020. There are certain things I should note about the tweet in particular that could help narrow down the options. The character renders the developer was referring to could have only been the Battle Healer or the Firecracker, since those were the only cards that released somewhat close by to the publishing of the tweet, with the Firecracker being the first release out of the two. On top of that, the developer said that it would be the biggest character release, which means that it could not have been a building or a spell. Even though this seems like it was pretty useful information, this only narrows down the Royal Delivery, since this was the only spell that released in 2020, and we didn't get any buildings in 2020. If we purely use what the tweet was referring to, without looking at the renders, this would point to the Electro Giant. The Electro Giant was the 100th card added to Clash Royale, so that itself is a pretty significant release that would constitute them saying it would be the biggest card release of 2020. And knowing Clash Royale, they love to use jokes and wordplays, meaning that the biggest card release could have been referring to the size of the card as well. But the thing is, when players analyzed the renders that the tweet was referring to, the evidence pointed towards something completely different. It didn't take long for people to conclude that there was nothing in the Battle Healer renders, so they looked at the Firecracker render, and this is where the leak that the developers were hiding was found. Keep in mind, this was the old Firecracker render. When you zoomed into the Firecracker's right eye, so from our perspective that would be the Firecracker's left eye, there was a figure visible. The figure wore a crown on top of their head and appeared to be around the same height as the Firecracker, since if the picture was taken when the Firecracker was standing, then this person's face is visible right in her view, meaning that it would mean the strange figure had to be the same height as the Firecracker. And before I get any comments saying that this is fake, I will leave all original sources as well as the OG renders posted by Clash Royale themselves in the description, so you can have a look at that for yourself. Some weird things about the render was that the figure had a red crown, which if you think about it from a lore perspective is kind of weird, since we would expect the Blue King or at least a blue troop to be taking the picture of the Firecracker, and players knew that this had to be the reference Clash Royale was making, since it was the only thing that could point towards a card release, and it was the only piece of evidence from the card renders that the lead developer was talking about. With this new information, players started to make predictions on what the card release could have been. So what was the figure in the icon? Players at the time suggested that it should have been the Death Knight, which was leaked by a famous Clash Royale leaker who allegedly found evidence of it in the game files. The Death Knight was suggested to be a troop who spawns guards to protect them, and when the knight itself killed a troop, it would spawn more guards. It wasn't clear at the time if it would be a guards troop or an entirely new troop called the Death Knight Guard, but the idea was similar to the current day witch in that it would spawn troops and attack independently. This would provide some evidence of supporting information from the tweet. This would be a massive character release, since it would be a new legendary card. Keep in mind, champions weren't a thing at the time, so it could have also been Clash Royale's way to introduce an ability for cards for extra elixir with the introduction of a new rarity. However, this wasn't the only suggested troop. Many players suggested that it would finally have hinted at the release of heroes into Clash Royale, with the release of the Barbarian King, since the figure had a crown on top of their head. This would support the tweet, since it would have been an absolutely huge release, and also, heroes are generally larger in size than regular troops, as seen in Clash of Clans, so even the size criteria would be met. And some people just suggested that players were overreacting and this was the Red King. But if this was the case, why would Clash Royale be leaking the Red King as the biggest character release of 2020? And in terms of Clash Royale canon, why would the Red King be taking a picture of the firecracker if we think about the render as some kind of in-universe photography session? It just didn't make sense for it to be the Red King, since the Red King was already in the game and it wouldn't really be a character release. Even the warrior from Boom Beach was suggested to be a potential troop, but since I know nothing about Boom Beach at all, I wouldn't really know what kind of ability it would have. The warrior from Boom Beach actually seemed like a pretty decent idea though, since it would extend the Clash Royale universe even more, and it would mean that the developers wouldn't need to create a whole new character render. If we look at the other things the leaker found in the game files, we also know that it could be the Master Builder, the Death Knight, the Ice Dragon, or the Skeleton Dragons. It can't have been any of the others since they were spells or buildings. Now, it can't have been the Skeleton Dragons or the Ice Dragon, since it would be pretty obvious if the figure in the eye was a dragon. That leaves us with either the Master Builder or, as I mentioned before, the Death Knight. The ability of the Master Builder was proposed to summon more machines. Now, in terms of what we know from Clash of Clans, this could mean that the Master Builder could have been the first hero of the new rarity that they wanted to add, since the battle machine is operated by the Master Builder in Clash of Clans lore. Now, all of this speculation would be nice if we knew that one of these cards actually got released, but they didn't, and the cards released in 2020 didn't match the card render at all. No card releases in 2020 had crowns, and none of them appeared to be a similar size to the firecracker. However, based on the render information, I think there is a high chance that the Little Prince that is currently in the game now was the card that was teased in this render. By far, based on the character in the render and the information we know, it points to the idea that the character in the render was the Little Prince. Not only does it have the same crown that can be seen in the picture, but the Little Prince's build is also similar to the firecracker, in that his height and overall size is very similar, which would make sense since the picture seemed to have been taken from an eye level. Furthermore, we know that the Little Prince is actually related to the Red King.
Both kings have princesses as daughters, but Little Prince is confirmed to be the son of the Red King. That makes sense.
Which means the fact that he has red-colored clothing as we see in the renders lines up perfectly with Clash Royale canon. A potential nod to the biggest card release of 2020 part of the tweet may be the name of the Little Prince season, which was Little Prince Big Troubles. So the biggest trouble-causing character release of 2023 lines up with the tweet as well, but maybe I'm just overthinking it. And to debunk the idea that it's the Red King, it kind of makes sense that the Red King would assign his son to take photos of Clash Royale cards, since he's too busy being a king to photograph random cards, and he trusts his son to take those pictures instead of random troops. Additionally, the Little Prince is actually more similar to the Death Knight than you think. Not only is he able to spawn a guard, albeit costing extra elixir, he is also able to attack independently. When we compare the leaked troop to the Little Prince, we see that it's actually really similar. If the Little Prince gets in trouble, he can spawn a guard that protects him, much like the ability suggested for the Death Knight. But since the Death Knight would have most likely been a legendary, it wouldn't have been an extra elixir cost. But who knows, the champion update that came out in 2021 might have been the exact update that we were going to get in 2020. We see a similar representation of this with the Golden Knight and the Bandit. Even though the Bandit can dash, it can only target single troops, while the Golden Knight dash can target multiple troops but also cost extra elixir for not only the ability, but the troop itself. This would have suggested that the Death Knight would have been a scaled down version of the current day Little Prince. Maybe he would have been a melee troop that could spawn guards instead of bats like the Night Witch. Some more damning evidence that the person in the image is the Little Prince is that the firecracker render supposedly randomly changed in mid-2020, according to this Reddit post. And if you look at the image at this time, you can almost clearly see the Little Prince. It's kind of insane how much resemblance there is, and you can kind of see his smiling face as well, which, as we know, the Little Prince is always evilly smiling. So did Clash Royale make a mistake, or was the Little Prince / Death Knight actually meant to be released in 2020? And what was the reason for delaying it? I would have to guess the reason it was delayed to the extent that it was, or didn't even get released, was due to Clan Wars 2, and maybe even the worldwide pandemic. And while it is funny to joke about how Clan Wars 2 is always the reason for everything being bad in Clash Royale, even though the update was terrible, Clan Wars 2 would have taken up a significant amount of time and resources from Supercell to not only fix it, but also to build it throughout 2020. This lines up best with the release. Clash Royale probably wanted it to be the 100th card, and the 100th card was set to be released in late 2020. So after the release of Clan Wars 2, Clash Royale probably began working on the card releases of 2020. But since Clan Wars 2 was such a bad update, they had to rework it, meaning that cards that were meant to be released were delayed. This probably meant that Clash Royale had to release a separate card that was different from the Little Prince, or what it would have been called at the time, the Death Knight, which is why we actually got the Electro Giant. This makes sense because Clan Wars 2 was released in late August 2020, but Supercell had to do damage control for months after its release to make sure it wasn't full of glitches and exploits. The Electro Giant was released in November of that year, so this lines up perfectly. Additionally, it was probably already being planned back in 2019 that the Death Knight, or whatever the special card release was, would be released during 2020. So it wasn't planned that the Clash Royale developer team would have such a large hurdle in their way with the worldwide pandemic. This kind of makes sense, because while researching for this video, I noticed that if you look at the time between card releases in 2020, there was a maximum of a 2-month gap between each card release throughout the year. However, the gap between the release of the Skeleton Dragons and the Electro Giant was 4 full months. This was the first time in the entire year that there was this large of a gap between 2 card releases. Once again, this kind of proves that perhaps the developers were working on something big, but they didn't have enough time, so they released a backup card, which was the Electro Giant. It also, once again, best lines up with the release of Clan Wars 2. With the Skeleton Dragons being released in June 2020, it was probably anticipated for the 100th card to be released shortly after. But this is when Clash Royale started to roll out Clan Wars 2, and they had to focus their attention on basically fixing the whole update. The thing is, the current day Little Prince may have ended up being a completely different card back in 2020. It may have been more similar to the leaked Death Knight, and maybe I'm looking too deep into it, but in the Little Prince trailer, we can see that the Little Prince stole the Royal Scroll that is used to introduce champions into the arena, and he put his own face on it, meaning that the Royal Scroll was originally meant to be given to someone else. This may be a reference to the fact that the Little Prince stole the spot from the Death Knight in the arena. Another thing that might align with the leak canonically is that if the firecracker was introduced into the arena in 2020, the Little Prince may have been too young to fight in the arena at the time, so the king gave him less important roles like photographing new troops, so he only became old enough to fight in the arena around 3 years later. Overall, it kind of sucks that not only Clan Wars 2, but also the worldwide pandemic in 2020 may be the reason we missed out on perhaps the greatest card announcement in Clash Royale history. In my opinion, I think Clash Royale should have focused on releasing the special character instead of Clan Wars 2, but the issue was that Clash Royale had been hyping up Clan Wars 2 since May of 2020, so they were kind of stuck in the dilemma where they had to release Clan Wars 2, otherwise the hype would be useless. The dev team probably planned to release Clan Wars 2 and then start working on the new card, but again, Clan Wars 2 needed so much damage control that they just lost time. I also think that the modern dev team has also kind of forgotten about it, since the new firecracker card icon doesn't acknowledge the figure in the reflection of the firecracker's eye at all, and in fact, her right eye is barely visible in the new icon, so maybe the dev team could still be hiding it, or they've given up on it. It's entirely possible that the figure in the firecracker render was not the Little Prince, which implies that Clash Royale had either missed one of the greatest card releases in the game's entire history due to a bad update, or this has a deeper meaning that not even the player base would be aware of. The unfortunate thing about the old firecracker icon is that we will truly never get an answer on what the figure in her eye was, since the dev team hasn't addressed it to this day, and the original lead developer is now different, so we really have been left in the dark. I'll be honest, this was an idea I had around a year ago, but I scrapped it since I didn't think there would be enough evidence. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the developers were really trying to convey something big. I hope you enjoyed this video though. Thanks for watching.